can accept just as much risk doing a business acquisition as doing a startup if you don't buy the business the correct way.
Mhm.
People need to very critically look at what they're watching, and they need to ask themselves, am I overindulging in what Harvard Business Review has termed success porn?
Mhm.
The reality of the world of small business is that the meat is in the ownership.
Right.
If you own it and it's profitable and doing well, that's where you profit. The exit usually comes because somebody has something happen in their own life that prevents them from continuing to operate it any further.
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast, where you can escape the corporate trap through franchise ownership. Here's your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, the Franchise Guide.
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, your franchise guide. I have a very exciting episode. This is David C. Barnett's, I believe, five published episode. This will be our fourth guest appearance on the show. David, welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast.
I'm excited, Giuseppe, because I heard somewhere that if I appear 5 times, I get a franchise freedom jacket. So
And
I'm
a
looking
jacket,
forward
yeah.
to that. Where I'm 80% of
Yes.
the way there. Here we go. I'm looking forward to this.
I got to work. It's like the Saturday Night Live jackets that they've been
Yeah.
giving out. So I like that. I gotta. We'll figure out. Maybe I have a robe. I think we can give away. So that's a great idea. I like that idea. So people have heard you on this show. You're my go-to for business strategy. Exit strategy is one of our most popular episodes. Give the audience maybe just a little bit of background, and we're going to dive in because that's
Sure.
some exciting news.
Yeah, so I'm a former business broker, a lifelong entrepreneur. I've started businesses, I've bought businesses, I've sold them, I've closed them. So I've also seen the downside of where you can end up in a dark spot sometimes in the world of entrepreneurship. Back in 2000, at the end of 2008, I got into the world of business brokerage, and I was a business broker until the end of 2011. I left my brokerage. I got out of that industry just because of the up and down cash flow, and that was the period of time with the great financial crisis as well. And I went through some personal stuff. I got a divorce at the time. I ended up working as a banker, and while I was at the bank, people kept calling me looking for help with their small business deals. And so I got brought back into this world when the bank reorganized. I got a package, to leave the organization, and I used that money to kickstart a consulting business. And along with the consulting business, I did some marketing moves, like I wrote some books. I started a YouTube channel. And so now those online things and the books that I've written help to introduce me to people from around the world that I work with. And so I work with people who want to buy a business or sell a business as a consultant now. And so I help take them through the process. And much like an attorney or an accountant, as I do different projects for my clients, I build them along the way. And so I'm not, charging commissions like a business broker might, but I've helped hundreds of people do deals. More importantly, I've helped probably well over 1,000 people not do a deal, which was a crappy deal. There's a lot of bad deals out there. And, someone with a lot of experience who's seen a lot of stuff can usually be a shortcut to understanding if something is hazardous or not.
Yeah, I like that. That's and that's the thing. Part of the value you bring to the table is what's a good deal and what's not, and if it's not so good deal, what will make it a good deal? And that's part of the nature of the business. When people ask like, "What's your success rate?" It's like, well, if I'm helping people, the success rate is high, right? It's it's
Yeah.
up to you to make that final decision. I think that's great. The exit strategy is one of the most popular downloaded. We joke about it, but when I bought my first franchise, I asked how do I sell this business down the road, and the franchisor took a step back and said, "Well, what the heck? Am I regretting this decision of approving you?" But people want to know that. There's a lot to build in, and with an exit strategy, you really have to kind of factor in what's the time frame, what should you be doing, because that time frame does absolutely change things. So with that being said, big announcement, new book. Tell us, I think it's number 8.
Yeah.
Tell us the title there and what the book is about, because that's going to be the theme of the show.
It's buying versus starting a small business. And so it's brand new, just came out Labor Day. And the reason why I wrote this book, all the other books I've written have been about selling a business or buying a business. I have been involved in starting many businesses, and I've given advice and guidance to many people that were growing a business or looking at doing a startup. But I always kind of avoided the space because there's so many other people online talking about starting businesses. And one of the things that I've noticed, I've always been a big proponent of people buying an existing business because you've got an established cash flow there. But here's the issue is that people are drawn towards these established businesses because they feel like it's a no-brainer and it's going to be an instant guarantee of success because the previous owner was successful and can
Right.
demonstrate a certain cash flow. And that success doesn't always transfer to the new owner. And the second thing is that you can accept just as much risk doing a business acquisition as doing a startup if you don't buy the business the correct way.
Mhm.
And so one of the biggest problems that we see is that the price people pay for a business is way too high for the cash flow that they're going to get, or the deal structure is not correct. So, maybe they'll get a loan from a bank and that might be over 10 years, but maybe there's some seller financing
Mhm.
and maybe the seller financing is too aggressive. Maybe the seller wants their money paid out in 2 or 3 years and they put themselves into this cash flow pinch, sometimes without even accurately understanding what their numbers are going to look like. And before the call, you brought up the whole idea of cash flow from a business broker's point of view. Common term for this is seller's discretionary earnings. A lot of people who come into the world of buying a business don't really know what that means. It's the
Agreed.
definition. The definition is the cash flow available to an owner operator that works full time in the business, and it's a derivative of EBITDA, which means that depreciation, income taxes, interest, these have all been added back. And so someone might believe that a business with a cash flow of $200,000 means if I buy this business, I get $200,000, but that's not what it
Mhm.
means. What it means is that the owner will have $200,000 available if the performance continues the way it has been to then pay a salary for themselves, the debt service to the bank,
Mm.
pay for any capital equipment replacement because depreciation is how accountants account for things wearing out. We've added it back, which means you now need a budget out of your cash flow to replace things like trucks and equipment, machinery, etc., and taxes, right? And so, no, the $200,000 doesn't go in your pocket. You're going to draw some kind of salary out of there, and you got to make sure that you've got enough money to cover everything else. And people who don't do the math correctly can end up in a position where there's no money left for them. And so, one of the things that I bring up in the book, Buying versus Starting a Small Business, is that I believe that whether you are inclined to buy a business or you're thinking about starting a business, there are advantages to considering the other strategy in your plan to get into business. And so, for example, I'll often say, I'll say to someone who wants to buy a business, before you pull the trigger on this deal, let's really take a close look at what it might cost to reproduce this.
Right.
And so, in the case of an overpriced business, for example, you know, I had a conversation with someone just a little while ago. The example is actually in the book where they were looking at buying a lawn maintenance company that had a little over 100 residential accounts and maybe a dozen or so commercial accounts. And it produced a certain cash flow for the owner. And there's a lot of talk out there about what businesses are worth. And so they applied a multiple to the cash flow and they said, this is what we want for the business. And so the buyer initially thought it seemed reasonable. The business broker thought it seemed reasonable. But when I was talking with this guy, I said, if you just hired two people to do the lawn maintenance and then you hired a salesperson,
Mhm.
do you think within a year and a half you could get over 100 accounts? And what would that cost you? And it was a sum that was much lower than what they were looking for to sell the business. And it really gives someone, pause for thought. Like, does it really make sense to do this deal for what I'm acquiring? Right. Some businesses have irreplaceable sort of characteristics. If you are the only gas station at Walt Disney World, maybe you can charge more for gasoline or you have some kind of crazy advantage because of your location.
Mhm.
But for a lot of businesses out there, they compete with all other kinds of companies. There's regular competitive pressures. And if you're going to take the risk of getting into business, whether it's a startup or an acquisition, you have to be fairly compensated for the risks that you're taking. You got to get a return on your money, but you got to get a return on your time. And I've just seen too many people get into deals where they've overpaid for a business.
Mhm.
And so, while the startup doesn't come with the customers, you can often get into it for quite a bit less money.
I like that, and it's very well said. And I'm definitely using this show as a reference point because that's the key right there. It's like, what is that cash flow? What is the appropriate multiple? I know when I sold my business, how involved are you in the business? Some people, you have two buyers. You have someone that's buying it as an investment and someone that's buying it and he or she is going to be in that business full time. So if they're an investor, they're going to say, well, if the owner, myself, was in the business 40 hours, they're going to have to replicate me. They're going to have to find someone else. And in my case, they wanted to back that amount out and say, well, I need to we'll throw a number, $100,000 out of the cash flow because I have to find a manager to replace you. Let's look at
Right.
kind of what's left over. But the key thing I'm seeing, because I do work with business brokers as well across the country, is the idea of forgetting to factor in the debt service, right? It's like, okay, maybe the owner doesn't have debt, but you will have debt as you incur and buy this business. What is
Yeah.
that SBA loan payment per month that you have to, that'll significantly reduce the cash flow depending on what it is. So there's these key areas, but where I think you nailed it is when looking at a business, you have to look at a differentiator. What's differentiating that business, as to your point? And I was lucky enough to get an early copy of the book, but like with the lawn care business, if I were to replicate this myself, yes, it may take a year, but look at the premium that you're paying for this resale. It may be
Yeah.
3 times, SDE, seller discretionary earnings, versus doing it on your own. And there's no guarantee to either one, right? That the one business will continue the cash flow and that you'll build the business to that point. But that is a huge, huge thing that I think people need to consider with any resale.
Now, no, the big risk that I often point out to when it comes to starting a business from scratch is that you then have to figure out how to actually execute. Like
Right.
as a
Right.
business owner, you have to figure out how do we actually serve the customers, make the product or whatever it is that you're doing. And so there's risk in that you don't face with buying a business because you've already got those systems in place. But, like you talk about franchises on this program all the time, and that's part of what a franchise tries to do, right? They try to simplify the startup by providing the how
Right.
of whatever the product or service is, right? So it just highlights that there's other ways around some of the problems, whichever pathway someone decides to go.
Yes, and by the way, and there's risk with the franchise. You wrote a
Mhm.
book. It was funny. We were introduced our first episode, franchise warnings, and I go, "Who the heck did I get on the show over here?" And we were saying,
I got
"Yes,
one of those here too.
there you go." You got 8 books. I think we're gonna have to get them all on there. We're gonna link them to the show notes. But franchise warnings. When you look at the title, like, oh my gosh, who did I have on the show? What are we getting into? But we're saying the exact same thing. These are some warning signs. There's
Yeah.
4,000. Just say we'll just round the number of franchise companies, but not all models are built the same. Not all models have their systems are not necessarily all equal. Right? Many of them will excel in certain areas, and you still have to do your due diligence and factor in what the franchisor has done in the past and things like that. So very well said. Franchise could be a good option, but you still have to go through the due diligence and speak with your fellow potential franchisees.
Yeah, and another big thing that I try to get across in the book is just showing people examples of how to change their thinking around the business model or idea that they come up with. And I use a couple of basic examples, but what I find when I speak to people who are new to the world of entrepreneurship is that they will get an idea like I want to open, this kind of business. And what
Mhm.
they see is they see a business like the one they might want to have, and they see maybe that there's a big investment, there's equipment, machinery, a location that needs to be built out, all this kind of thing. And maybe it's going to cost $1 million to build. And so what I do in the book is I show people different ways to reimagine a business and how can we achieve the same things while reducing the risk or reducing the investment, trying to become more resourceful in how we put things together. Because as you move through the world of, building a business, the whole idea is to keep testing the market to make sure that you're not fooling yourself,
Right.
right? And so a classic example is someone might say, "Oh, I'm thinking about introducing this new product that I want to make." And one of the things that I will suggest to people is, well, can you find a supplier for that product right now and just go out and make sales of their product
Mhm.
and see if there really is a market for the product and figure out what people are willing to pay and what their expectations are before you invest in everything you need to actually make the product,
Right.
right? Because you could discover that you're wrong. You could discover that there isn't really a market, or that people are very price sensitive. They're not willing to pay what you think that they're willing to pay. You could come up with all kinds of new information once you actually get into the market and start talking to people. And if you are just reselling someone else's product, well, then you've avoided a whole swath of investment that you might normally have made. And people become very locked into an echo chamber. Like if you think it's a good idea and you share it with other people
Right.
who like you and love you, and they're going to be maybe encouraging you, saying, "Yeah, that is a great idea. Who wouldn't want that?" Or if you like, let's say you're involved in a certain kind of sport, if you really like football, and you say to your buddies who are also into football, "I want to start this football themed business," they're all going to think it's a great idea. But are there really enough people in the public who are going to go out of their way to patronize a football themed business, that they're going to think it's that great that they're going to pay the price you need, et cetera, to make it work? And this is where you need to kind of test these
Mhm.
ideas. And so I try to get people to learn how to reimagine the way they organize their thoughts about the business, to be constantly testing before they risk the big money.
Right.
And there are ways to get into business with relatively no risk. And as you establish, that there really is a demand or a need in the marketplace, you can then make decisions to build things out. And it's interesting, you know, when you've already proven a market, if in the case I gave of the selling someone else's product, if you then went into a bank and said, "Look, I'm already selling $1 million worth and I'm buying from a wholesaler, but I can make more money if you give me the money for this machinery to make my own," that's really easy for a banker to agree to, because they already know that you've got the sales,
Right.
right?
That's a very good point, because that's another factor is how am I going to get funding? You need to make, you got to put that business plan together. You have to sell it to the funding companies, to the SBA, to wherever you're getting the monies from. So that's a very good point. A lot of people listening in, they're corporate executives. They don't like their job. They're unhappy. They're looking for what's next. They're looking at resales, whether it be a franchise or non-franchise. They're looking at franchise. They're looking for that next step. What are some, you know, piece of advice maybe that you wish you had, again, going way back when, but that you would give to someone that's in that phase, like where, so right now what I'm seeing is the internet, there's a ton of information, tons of shows and podcasts, don't know where to start. And it seems to get to be information overload. So what do you recommend to someone that's making the leap there, looking to make the leap?
I think that people need to very critically look at what they're watching, and they need to ask themselves, am I overindulging in what Harvard Business Review has termed success porn?
Mm.
So
Like that.
you can tune in to all kinds of stuff all the time that is showing you how successful, profitable, and well off everyone is that gets into business. And the reality is that a lot of those people have something to sell you. And the reality of the world of small business is this failure rate is incredibly high. And then there's also, on top of the failure rate, there's what I call the purgatory, right? So you can not fail and not be successful at the same time.
Right.
So, there's an awful lot of businesses out there where the owners do not take home a rate of pay commensurate with their skills. They don't even take home a rate of pay that they would earn if they worked in that industry for somebody else that had to pay a fair market wage to get them to come and work, right? But those businesses are still open. I've often had people will point me towards SBA default rates, and they'll say, "Oh, small businesses aren't risky. Look at the low default rate of the SBA."
Right.
And I'll say to people, like, that's got nothing to do with the success of small businesses. You could be a small business owner with an SBA loan whose spouse has a great income, and you might be working for free in your business, and you're still paying that SBA loan because you don't want to have a default impact
Right.
your credit score because you personally guaranteed it. And maybe they have a lien on your house too, right? So to me, that's not a loan default, but it's certainly not a success story, because the person's going to work every day just to make payments on the loan. So be careful what you're consuming. You can again, these are internet echo chambers. The magical algorithms behind all social media, they are looking at
Mm.
what you are consuming so they can feed you more of it, right? And so this is why one person's Instagram feed is all about people getting rich with business, and another person's Instagram feed is all about model railroad trains and trips on historic railroads. It's like it feeds you what it thinks you want to see, and it can be
That's
very
very true. Yeah.
it can become really easy to believe that everybody else in the world is watching the same stuff you are, and they're not. So look at what you're consuming and ask yourself, is this having an impact on the way I'm thinking? Am I realistically looking at what's going on? And one of the great ways to test yourself, Giuseppe, is pick an industry that you might be interested in. And if you can get access to the RMA, Risk Management Associates data, or Industry Canada, up in Canada, they offer this for free online, where you can actually search industries and you can look at the aggregate tax return data for all the companies in that industry,
Hmm.
and it will divide them up into quartiles. And you can really see how businesses in that industry actually perform, like what their sales are, what their costs are, what their overhead, what their net income is. And you can really see the reality of these industries. And what you'll see is that in almost every business you can imagine, the business is hard. Like there's a lot of businesses that struggle to make money. There's a lot of
Right.
owners that struggle through ups and downs. It it's not easy. And so this is why we hear those statistics about the high failure rates. And this is why I think you need to build a solid foundation of understanding an industry, understanding a business, and then try to maneuver your game pieces in such a way that you reduce the risk as much as possible. And that might mean buying an existing franchise location so you already know what the performance
Mhm.
is and you've got the help of a franchisor. That might be a strategy for some people. For other people, it might just be buying an existing business if they can negotiate a price that makes sense. And for other people, if these opportunities just aren't there or don't make sense, then maybe they should look at a startup, but maybe they can reformat their business in
Mhm.
different ways to help them do it in a less risky way.
I
So
like that. Yeah.
that's my aspiration for people out there. Is the mission of my business is to help people avoid bad deals, and that's why I put out the enormous amount of educational content that I do. Just because I want to be informative and I want to help people learn.
And there's so much, right? There's so much to consider, so many moving parts, and that's why I like your approach. It's more coaching style. I remember way back when I had sent over, I'd refer someone over to you that wanted to sell their business, and you shocked that person and said, "Well, why do you want to sell that business?" And he was ready to say, "Well, all right, David, are you sending me the contracts? What can we get for it?" And you helped that individual. I'm not going to name names, but on a 30-minute call or a 30 or 60-minute call, he went from being full time in the business to being, I would say as semi absentee as possible from 8-hour days to maybe an hour or two. And he ended up keeping that business, recently sold it, very recently. But it was very interesting that the approach was like, I'm selling this, but why? And if there's a key aspect that you don't like about the business, let's change it up and, let's fix what's there because this is a cash cow.
Yeah, yeah. The meat or the juice in businesses is not in the sale. They sell for relatively low multiples of cash flow. It's not like what you see in the headlines out of Silicon Valley with these tech startup type affairs. Mark Zuckerberg sells the
Right.
shares for huge amounts of money. The reality of the world of small business is that the meat is in the ownership.
Right.
If you own it and it's profitable and doing well, that's where you profit. The exit usually comes because somebody has something happen in their own life that prevents them from continuing to operate it any further. So if you've got a great business and it's throwing off a lot of cash and you're not happy with the business, maybe you can make a change as you suggested. Usually, if you decide to get out, it's because you realize, hey, I cannot do this anymore.
Right.
And I'm not willing or unable to make some kind of change. And so I've got to get out. And the minute you decide that you've got to get out of a business, you need to act because otherwise your own attitude will start to impact employees.
Yes.
That attitude will infect customers and the business performance will decline. The minute the owner is disengaged, everyone starts to feel it. And you've probably been in a business and you can tell the owner's disengaged, like things aren't clean, things aren't maintained, things are breaking. You know, it doesn't feel good to be in a business where the owner is not engaged. And we pick up on that as people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it affects that valuation, for, you think you may be helping the business and you're harming it. You're affecting other people's livelihoods, people working there. So now very, very well said. We covered a lot, and your resources, I think, are some of the best. Where can, if people want to get a hold of you or learn a little bit more about the resources and the services you offer, what's the best place that they can reach you?
davidcbarnett.com will bring you right to my blog site. There's a tab there called books where you can find my books, the latest book. You can buy it on Amazon or buy it in a PDF right from my website. And then there's blog posts there with recent videos, etc. will lead you right over to YouTube. If you just want to subscribe on YouTube, all my YouTube videos get fed into an audio podcast stream. So if you prefer to listen in the car, you can do that too. It's easy to find me. If you just type David Barnett small business into almost anything, I should come right up.
Awesome. David, it's been a pleasure. We'll work on our 5th episode, get you that coat or that robe that I promise you, and definitely looking forward to our next conversation. Thanks again.
Awesome, Giuseppe. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn how to make the transition from corporate to owning your franchise, join Giuseppe on the next episode. You can also follow on all social media platforms and achieve financial and time freedom today.